Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. Today I've put together a collection of 5 spring and Easter thrift flips. For my first project, I'm going to be giving this frame a makeover. My first step is to remove the backing. I actually ended up having to cut the little hanger across the back there so I could take the glass out. I'm then going to be using Redesign Sorrento Laurels. I'm going to dust the center design with cornstarch, and then I'm going to be using my Dust Air Dry Clay. I've rolled it into a sort of sausage shape there, and then I'm just going to start pushing that clay in and down. And then I'm sort of pushing my clay off to the left and right to remove the excess. Once I have most of the excess removed, I'm going to take my palette knife and I'm going to run it along the top of my mold to get rid of any excess. After flexing the mold, I'm going to turn it over and then let gravity help me remove the design. Now this is quite an intricate design, so I did have a couple of little pieces that broke off, but I'm not worried about that. I will just glue those back in place. Because this is quite a delicate design, I decided to add my glue to the surface of the frame and then spread that out instead of trying to put it just on the back of my casting. And then I'm going to gently position that in place. I'm then going to glue the 2 little tails of the ribbons that sort of fell off there. I'm going to glue those down. So don't worry if you don't get your mold out in one piece, you can always glue it back together. I'm going to cast one more of this design and place it on the left-hand side. I'm then going to dust the design on the left-hand side of my Sorrento Laurels mold, and I'm just going to cast the bottom section. So remember, you can just cast bits and pieces of your molds. You don't have to use them as is. So I've just worked my clay in there, I've pulled out the excess, and then I'm going to flex it and pull the casting out. After adding some glue to the back, I'm going to position it on the right-hand side so that it looks like a continuation of the other design that we have up the top, and I'm repeating the same process on the left. I'm then going to use Redesign's Floral Chain. I'm going to dust a certain section of the design on the right. So I'm just going to be partially casting this design. So you can see I've just put a little bit of clay in, I'm working out the excess. I'm then going to flip it over just like before and carefully pull it out. Again, this one was very delicate, so I did have a few little breaks here and there, but again, not worried about that. I'm then going to be positioning it up the top of my frame, and I basically want to repeat that design twice and have the designs sort of mirroring each other and meeting in the center. So I'm going to glue down the 2 sections up the top, and then I'm also going to be repeating the same design down the bottom. If you don't have the patience for clay, you could definitely use some resin for this particular sort of project. I would just suggest using some hot glue to create a dam so you're only casting exactly what you need. I'm then going to be casting just part of the center floral chain design. I just want that little swag of roses there, so I'm working my clay in, and then after pulling it out, I'm going to position it in the bottom of my frame. So it looks like it's sort of part of that extra design that we added down the bottom, and you can see I've cast 4 of those and then I'm gluing them down. I let my castings dry overnight, and the next day this is how it is looking. I'm going to take Paint Couture's British Grey chalk paint, and I'm going to carefully paint over the top of my castings. I say carefully because these are of course still a little bit fragile and I don't want to wreck or pull off any of those designs. I'm going to continue to work my way around the frame, adding that beautiful grey paint to the entire piece. So you may notice as I'm applying it, I'm brushing it on, but then I'm also using a dabbing and stippling motion. This is to create texture. It's also going to hide any excess glue that I didn't tidy up very well, and it's just going to give this piece an overall look of age. When my paint was dry, I took some of Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin, and I'm going to seal the entire frame. The clear coat is going to seal my paint and protect my piece, but it's also going to be a great base for our next step. After my clear coat has dried, I took Paint Couture's light brown sugar glaze, and I'm going to start working it into all of those beautiful details that we created using the redesign mold. So I'm really working it into those crevices, and then I'm taking a wet wipe and I'm wiping back some of the excess. So I'm wiping, but I'm also dabbing and just really trying to create an aged finish here. As you may have guessed, if you've been watching me for a while, I do love things to have a bit of age and to look worn. So this is definitely going to help me achieve this look. So I'm going to continue adding this beautiful glaze to the entire frame until the whole piece is covered. When my glaze is completely dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic, and I'm going to start going over the top of the high points and the details of our castings. My vision for this is that it's an old gilded frame that is weathered and worn. The gilding's worn away a little bit, but honestly, I love anything that looks like it's been around for a long time. It's such a beautiful classic look. So I'm going to continue to add that bronze until I've added it to all of the details. Now, if you're not a fan of bronze, obviously at this point you could come in with a silver, copper, gold. It really is up to you and whatever look you're trying to achieve. I just really feel like this brings out a certain elegance in this design. I hope that as you're watching this, it's inspiring you to look at frames a little bit differently when you go thrifting. You can definitely transform them with redesign or IOD molds. Now I'm coming in and I'm going around some of the edges of the frame there, just again to make it look like a faded gilding. And then once I'm finished adding it to the outside parts of the frame, I did then take my brush and lightly go over the center sections of the frame. Again, I don't want full coverage, I just want a hint of that bronze. Next, I am going to take AB Studio's new beautiful decoupage paper 4784. These beautiful bunnies with the pink bows are going to be perfect. I'm actually going to just sticky tape it to the back of my frame backer. And I'm doing this so that I can take it out and put another image in there if I want, or I can use this decoupage paper in another way. So keep that in mind when you're buying rice paper, that you don't always have to use it and decoupage it. You can use it like artwork. And here's our first finished project. I love how this turned out. That frame has been completely transformed by those redesign molds and the Paint Couture products, and the AB Studios rabbits go perfectly in that frame. Let me know what you think of this project in the comments. My first project, I'm going to be using peat pots. I'm going to cut a little line there up the side and then through the center. And as you can see, I'm then pulling the sides of the pot together to make it a little bit narrower. Ultimately, what I want to create here is a cone shape. You can see I've done the same thing to the other pot sitting underneath it. And then I am going to start adding some glue to the inside of one of those peat pots that I have cut up there, and then a little bit on the seam there. I didn't have a foam cone, unfortunately, so I had to get a bit creative, and this is an option for you if you are in the same position. I just got these off Amazon. I will pop a link in the description. So as you can see, I am gluing and stacking the 3 peat pots together to create our cone shape. Once my glue had set, I then took some little eggs that I had in my craft stash and I started adding them to the side of our cone shape. Now these eggs are pretty little. You can probably get them on Amazon as well, or eBay, or any craft shop really at this time of year. And I'm just going to continue gluing those eggs around the cone in an even spaced out position. And once I have glued them all on, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Buttercream chalk paint and I'm going to go over the top of the entire piece. So over the egg, over the peat pots. You can see I'm adding that paint in a dabbing and stippling motion. That's going to hide some of the polystyrene texture. I'm then going to take Paint Couture's Duck Egg, and on every other egg I'm going to add 1 coat of this lovely blue tone. Again, I don't need this to look perfect because we are going to be layering some moss in between each of the eggs, so it's okay if I get some in other areas. When that's dry, I took light brown sugar antiquing glaze by Paint Couture. I put a little bit in a container and then I used my mister to water it down a little bit. I then went over the top of each of those eggs. This is going to give them a bit more of an antiqued look. Once I had all of the eggs covered, I then took a wet wipe and started dabbing off that product. Again, I want these to look almost like they're speckled on there, like they're aged. I then also took some of Paint Couture's pitch black chalk paint and I've just taken a little bit out, put some in a plastic container and watered it down. And now I'm going to create some speckles by just sort of tapping my brush over the top. And then once I am happy with that coverage, I am going to grab my wet wipe again. And again, just going to dab at that paint to tone it down and make it a bit more subtle. Once that paint was dry, I then took my hot glue gun and started adding some glue in between the eggs. I'm then going to start positioning some forest moss in between each of them, and I'm just going to work my way around my little cone shape there and continue adding that forest moss. You can get this at a few places, Amazon, eBay, there's a lot of different places you can get this. It just depends what look you're after. I feel like this would also look really lovely with Spanish moss as well. So as you can see, I'm just going to continue to add that glue until I have completely covered my little cone shape there with that moss. Next, I took a little mini bird's nest that I got on a craft website and I'm just pulling it apart. And I'm then going to pull it even more apart so I can get some strands of that grapevine style material. And I'm just going to start gluing that down. So I'm adding a little dab of glue, adding one end of that little grapevine material there. And then I'm going to curve it around the tree, almost like it's tinsel, but obviously this is an Easter project. And I'm loving the texture and the beautiful sort of woodland natural feel this brings to the piece. I'm going to repeat this a few times, just adding that little vine material in certain areas. If you're going to do this, it will be up to you how much you add. Next, I'm going to focus on the base. I thrifted this sweet little urn not long ago and I'm going to prime it with Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in white. This is obviously quite a shiny surface, so I do need to get that primer down so that my paint will stick and stay there. Obviously, I do have a French country vision for this piece, so this urn is perfect. I'm then going to take Paint Couture's Buttercream and I'm going to go over the top of my 2 coats of dry primer, and it's going to take 2 coats of this Buttercream to get the coverage that I want. Once I finished painting the outside, I then added that buttercream to the inside. Even though I'm going to be gluing the little topiary on top, if I decide to change the use of this piece, I want the inside to be finished as well. Next, I'm going to take light brown sugar antiquing glaze by Paint Couture, and I'm just adding that over the top of my dry buttercream paint. So I'm really working it into all of those details. And then once I'm happy with the coverage, I will come in with a wet wipe and pull back some of the excess. So this is definitely going to give us a vintage antiqued look. If I inspire you to try any of these Paint Couture products from today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. I also added some of the glaze to the inside as well. Once my glaze was completely dry, I added some hot glue to the rim of the urn, and then I'm going to position our topiary on top. Finally, I added a chiffon ribbon to the base and tied a simple bow. And here's our finished Easter topiary tree. This was such a fun project and I love how it turned out. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my next project, I'm going to be giving this little thrifted teapot a makeover. As soon as I saw it, I thought it would be perfect to work with because of its cute small shape. I am going to be using Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in white to prime my surface first. This is obviously a shiny surface, so in order for me to paint it, I'm going to need to prime it. So I'm going to continue to paint the entire piece, including the little lid, and it's going to take 2 coats to prime it properly. Once the primer is dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Farmhouse linen and I'm going to give my little teapot 2 coats. When my 2 coats of paint are dry, I'm going to take Redesign's new Easter Wreaths mold. This is so cute. I'm so excited to be using this one. I'm going to dust the little bunny on the right there with cornstarch first, and then also the wreath that surrounds him. I'm then going to take my dust Air Dry Clay and start working it into the little bunny design first. So you can see I'm using my fingers to pull out the excess, and then I will flex that mold and carefully pull out our little design. I'm then going to start working my clay into the wreath design there. So again, just pushing that clay in and then pulling the clay out with my thumbs. And then once I'm happy with that, I will flex that mold. And this time, however, I did decide to flip the design over, and gravity definitely helped me get this intricate piece out. There are so many sweet, tiny little flowers in this design, so I didn't want to break any of them off. I am then going to start looking at my teapot. I actually ended up taking that wreath apart because it was a little bit bigger than I wanted, and I'm going to put the glue on the back. So I'm just using Sealy's Quick Set wood glue, and I'm going to start positioning it on the teapot. So you can see I'm putting it in sort of like a round shape there, but I really want my little bunny to sit in the center, so I'm definitely mindful of that. So I'm going to add some glue to the back of him and then sit him in the center down the bottom, gently molding him to the surface of the teapot, and then I'm going to add in the extra missing flowers. I also added some of the flowers that I didn't use to the top of the teapot, and now I'm also going to cast the sweet bow that's in the Easter Wreaths mold, and I'm going to be attaching that to the bottom underneath our little rabbit. I let my clay dry overnight, and then the next day I came in with that Farmhouse linen again, and I'm going to give the molds 1 coat of this lovely white paint so that it ties in with the rest of the teapot. When that was dry, I took Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin and I sealed the entire teapot and the lid. Because I'm going to be coming in with another colour and also some glazing, sealing my teapot is going to give me the freedom to wipe back as much or as little as I want. When that's dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Vintage Moss Mineral Paint, and I'm going to be adding 2 coats of that just to the teapot spout and also to the handle. I just love the combination of this lovely off-white tone with this beautiful earthy green. Because I have sealed my paint already, if I go in an area that I don't want the green paint, I'm able to wipe that back with a wet wipe. So if you are not very confident or you feel like you don't have the steadiest hand, I definitely recommend that you do seal before you come in with any additional colors. I also then took the vintage moss and added it to the teapot lid. I'm then going to add some of that same paint to the little leaf that's sitting on top of the teapot lid. And then I focused my attention on the teapot itself. You can see I've already started adding the green in. And as I was doing this, I decided that I would just paint all of the flowers in that vintage moss color. And then once I was happy with the coverage there, that I would actually come in and start wiping it back. I was trying to treat that vintage moss almost like it was a glaze, and I really liked the effect of this. So I'm going to continue to work my way around the wreath there, adding that vintage moss paint and then wiping it away with a wet wipe. And I'm working in small sections because obviously this is a paint, so it's not going to work exactly like a glaze. So I need to wipe it back pretty quickly before it starts to set. I'm also quite happy for it to go around the details of the molds as well. It's almost like it's highlighting around the edges. If you're going to give this a try at home, remember you could always come in with colours. You don't have to just stick with the green like I have. I tried to keep my palette pretty simple here, but you could come in with a whole bunch of colours and make a beautiful, colourful floral wreath. It just depends what look you're after. Next, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Pine Cone Chalk Paint, and I'm going to go over the top of our sweet little bunny in the center there. Now, I don't really feel like this step was absolutely necessary. I was still experimenting at this stage, but I did then come in with a wet wipe and wipe it back, again treating it a little bit like it's a glaze. I do ultimately come in with a glaze a bit later, so you could probably leave this step out if you're going for a similar look. When that was dry, I came in with Paint Couture's Crackle Step 1. I'm going to dab and stipple that product on. I'm going to go in the center there over the top of the bunny. I am also going to go over the top of the bow, but I didn't go over the florals. I felt like there was a lot going on with those already. So I'm going to continue to work my way around the teapot, adding it to the rest of the piece. I let that Crackle Step 1 dry for about an hour, and then when it felt sticky and tacky to the touch, I came in with Crackle Step 2 and applied it in the exact same manner as I had with Step 1. So just remember to, however, to be a little bit more gentle with this. You don't want to disturb that Step 1 too much. And then I let that dry overnight. The next day I came in with Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze, and I'm going to be going over the top of the entire teapot, really working that glaze into all of the details. I am of course going to be going over the top of the florals as well, but you'll see here that I'm coming in with a wet wipe and wiping it back and making sure that it's not too intense on the florals. We still want to see the beautiful green, but I do love how this glaze brings out the details of those molds. And of course it has made our bunny look really cute. And you can see what I meant about the pine cone not being completely necessary, because obviously that glaze is going to give him definition. I'm of course repeating the same process on the teapot lid. Once my glaze is dry, I took Paint Couture's Luxe Metallic in Bronze, and I'm going to go over the top of our little bow first. And I'm loving the pop of color that this gives, the brightness and the shine. Obviously I've gone for quite a earthy vintage look with the rest of it, using the green and obviously the glaze and the crackle. Adding this bronze just really makes these details pop. I'm also adding it to the center of the flowers. And here's a look at our Easter teapot. I love how this turned out. Those beautiful Easter wreath molds are so beautiful. I could see this being used as a planter or just a decor item sitting on a shelf and looking pretty. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For today's project, I used this clear fillable egg that I got online from a party supply website. I will link it in the comments. And I'm also going to use these two curtain rings that I thrifted. I'm going to first pull the little screw-in hooks out, and then I am envisioning these stacked on top of each other like a little stand that's going to go underneath our egg. So it's going to prop it up and give it a little bit more height and a little bit more grandeur. I'm thinking almost like one of those Fabergé eggs. So I'm going to take my Gorilla Super Glue Gel and I'm going to add some glue around the rim of one of them and put the other one on top. When that's dry, I'm going to add some glue to the bottom of our Easter egg. I have the two pieces together so that I can be sure that they are standing as straight as I would like. I'm then going to prime my surface with Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in white. You can see that I have taken the lid off. We don't need that right now. And I'm going to apply the primer using a sponge so that I don't get any brush strokes. And I'm going to be doing 2 coats of this to prime this properly. I'm then going to be using Redesign's new Salon de la Play mold, and I'm dusting the design that I want to use with cornstarch, and then I'm going to take some of my dust air dry clay and I'm going to work it into this design. This is such a beautiful, intricate design, and I am going to have to be very gentle when I am taking it out of the mold. You always want to go quite slow when you're doing this. If you really struggle, it has also been suggested that you pop it in the freezer for about 10 minutes and that makes getting it out a little bit easier, or you could use resin. So I'm going to flex that mold once I'm ready to take it out, and then I'm going to flip it over and bend that mold back as it starts to release. So gravity is definitely helping me here, but I'm also just going really slow, gently pulling out any little bits that are trying to stick in place, and as you can see, it is coming out quite nicely. Once I have my casting out, I'm going to add some of my Sealy's Quickset wood glue. I'm going to actually add it to the surface of our egg because obviously this design is so delicate. I just want to make sure there's lots of glue down there to hold it in place. So I'm positioning it where I want it to go, and then I am gently manipulating it to the shape of the egg. So there are going to be some sections that I'm going to need to trim off just to make it fit. So I'm then going to take my palette knife and I'm going to trim off the excess down the bottom. And again, just adjusting it, making sure everything's in place. And then I did decide to take that little bow off because we're going to reposition it. So I'm going to remove that. And then once I have done that, I am also going to pull the 2 bits together a little bit more, and then I'm going to cut off the excess that I don't want from the bow, that little bit that's hanging down in the center. We don't need that, that will just obscure the design. So I'm taking that off, and then I'm going to be adding some glue to the back of that bow and gluing that up the top. I'm then going to dust just part of that same mold with cornstarch, and I'm going to work my clay into the lovely little florals there. So remember, you can just use bits and pieces of your molds to suit whatever project you have. So I've worked my clay in, and then I am going to gently flex that mold and pull the design out. I am then going to add some glue to the back, and we're going to arrange this casting around the little curtain hoops that we've added to the base. So we're just going to dress those up and make it look more like a seamless piece. I'm going to continue casting those until I have the entire first ring covered, and then I did cast the opposite florals on that mold, so we had a little bit of design variation, and I'm going to glue that underneath just to go around the bottom. While that's drying, I'm going to take some of this styrofoam board and I'm going to trace around the top of the egg. This is going to give me some rough measurements, and then I'm going to use my scissors to cut this out. This is quite a messy task. Make sure you're doing this somewhere that you can have some easy cleanup, but we're going to be using this as a base, and I like to use this where I can because I get a lot of it having a shop and I don't like just throwing it out. It just seems really wasteful. So I'm just double checking here that I have the correct size, and then I'm going to take my hot glue gun and add some glue around the rim, and then I'm going to press it into the base of our egg. I'm then going to take my glue gun and just fill in some of those gaps around the edges. I'm then going to take some of Paint Couture's Crust texture, and I'm going to pull some of that out and put it in a plastic container. I'm then going to add a few drops of Paint Couture's Pinecone chalk paint and Pitch Black chalk paint and mix them together to create a dark brown. And then I'm going to start adding that over the top of our styrofoam. I really want this to look like dirt. I want to add some forest moss over the top, and if I didn't do this step, you would be able to see peaks of that styrofoam underneath. And also I like the idea of having a little bit of texture peeking up through as well. So I'm going to cover that entire base there, and then once I have that entire section covered, I just used my palette knife and just dabbed it to create a little bit of texture to make it look more like dirt. I then let that dry. While that's drying, I'm going to work on this little bird. I will link where I got that in the comments, and I'm going to prime it with Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in white. After my 2 coats of primer are dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Buttercream chalk paint, and I'm going to paint the entire little bird with 2 coats and then let it dry. I'm then going to take Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze, and I'm going to add it over our little bird. I really want to work this into all of the details on this sweet little statue. Ordinarily, I would often seal my piece, but because we're working on such a small area, I'm not having any trouble coming in with my wet wipe now and wiping back the excess. When that's dry, I'm going to take Vertigreen Antiquing Glaze, and I'm going to work that into some of the details and pull it back. I really want this to be a bit reminiscent of moss on a statue. While my bird is drying, we're going to turn our attention back to the base. I'm going to take Paint Couture's Crackle Step 1, and I'm going to apply an even coat of that over the top of our dry crust medium. Now, if you've used this before, you will know that Crackle Step 1 dries to a tacky and sticky finish. I want something that's going to hold down all of my Spanish moss. There's a lot of different little pieces. So once this is dry, it will be sticky enough to hold that in place. So once it's dry and it's sticky, I'm going to take some of that forest moss and I'm going to start spreading it out on the base. I just thought this was a better idea than super glue or wood glue. Remember, you can also use Crackle Step 1 for gold leafing as well. It's quite a versatile product. Once I was happy with the forest moss coverage, I took this little nest that I got online and I'm just pulling it out a little bit. I want it to be a bit bigger, so I'm loosening that up and just checking that I'm happy with how it looks with the bird. I'm checking that my moss isn't going to come falling out, that it's all stuck down, and then I'm going to add some Gorilla Super Glue gel to the bottom of the nest and put it in the center. Then when that's dry, I took these little eggs that I made by rolling up some air dry clay, and I'm just going to add some of that antiquing glaze to give them a bit more of a duller finish, more like real eggs would be in a nest. And then I'm going to add some glue to the bottom of our little bird, glue that in place. And then I'm also going to glue the little eggs to sit just near the little bird. I've got the bird sitting off center because I like to sort of see the profile of the bird a little bit more. Once the glue was dry, I took some more of my Gorilla Super Glue gel and I ran it along the seam where the top part of the egg meets the bottom, and then I put that in place, so we're gluing that down. I'm then going to take Redesign's Floral Chain Mold and I'm going to be just casting part of that mold. You can see I've just dusted part of it, and I'm just going to work my clay into one of the little floral swags there and then pull that out. I'm going to add some of my Sealy's Quickset wood glue to the back, and this is actually going to sit along the seam of the egg to hide that seam, and obviously it's going to add a nice element to our design. So I'm going to continue casting these little floral designs until I have covered up that entire seam. This project was inspired by a few different photos that I saw on Pinterest. As soon as I saw it, I thought it was definitely a project that I wanted to try and put my own spin on. Once I had everything glued down in place, I let my clay dry overnight. The next day, I came in with Paint Couture's Buttercream chalk paint, and I'm going to paint the entire base with 2 coats of that chalk paint. If I've inspired you to try any of these Paint Couture products today, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. Once my 2 coats of Buttercream chalk paint were dry, I then took Paint Couture's Crackle Step 1 and I am going to be coating the area on the egg that does not have any molds. I felt like adding it to our castings would just be a little bit too over the top, so we're just going to add it to that blank space there to give it more of a vintage vibe. When that is sticky to the touch, I'm going to come in and use Crackle Step 2, and again just applying it in a dabbing and stippling motion. And then I let Crackle Step 2 dry for several hours. While the crackle's drying, I took my amazing casting resin and measured out equal parts A and B. I then put it in my flexible silicone cup, stirred it really well, and then I am pouring it back into that same mold that we've been using, and I'm just going to be putting it in that smaller design. While that's setting, I'm going to take my Van Dyke brown glaze and we're going to go over the top of all of those beautiful casting details and of course our crackle. So you can see I'm really working it into all of those beautiful details, and then I'm taking a wet wipe and wiping back the excess so that that glaze sits in all of those lovely details. I'm going to continue adding this to the entire base until it's completely covered. Now, if this is a little bit too grungy, it's not quite to your taste, obviously you could leave this particular step out. Maybe you would do some dry brushing if you painted the base a darker color and did a bit of a reverse. Obviously it just depends what your style is. Once my glaze was completely dry, I then took Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic, and I'm just going to put a little bit on a small artist brush, and I'm going to go over the top of that sweet bow that we added. And then I'm also going to be adding it to a couple of the other details, but as I'm adding that, I'm also then coming in with my finger and just sort of dabbing off some of that excess so it's not as heavy in those sections. Just like we did with the bird, I'm now coming in with Paint Couture's Vertigreen Antiquing Glaze, and we're going to add that to some of the floral details. So I'm adding it, and then I'm taking a wet wipe and wiping back some of the excess. My vision for this piece was definitely to think about how a statue in an old English garden perhaps would age over time. It would get cracks, it would get dirty, and it would of course get moss. So that was definitely an inspiration as I was creating this. Once the glaze was dry, I then took Paint Couture's Vintage Lace Luxe Metallic Paint, and I'm just getting a little bit on my finger and I'm going to go over the top of some of the details. This is just going to give us a little bit of subtle shine. While that's drying, I'm going to take my casting out of the mold, so our resin piece is ready. I'm then going to use that same vintage lace metallic paint and coat both the front and back of this design. When the metallic paint was dry, I took some of my Luxe Bronze metallic paint and I'm just putting a little bit on my finger and I'm going to go over the top of some of the details. This piece is going to sit on top of our egg, so I'm going to take my hairdryer and heat up that resin piece so that it becomes flexible again. I'm going to work out how I'm going to mold it to the top, and then I'm going to add some of my Gorilla Super Glue gel to the underside of our resin casting. And then I'm adding a little bit to the top of the egg and then positioning it in place. I didn't have to hold it for too long, it did stick there pretty quickly. And here's our finished spring egg project. This project was a lot of fun. I definitely enjoyed trying something a little bit different. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. My first project, I'm using this wooden egg cutout that I got from Kmart Australia, and my first step is to remove that twine from the top, and I'm going to give it a coat of Dixie Belle's Buttercream chalk mineral paint. Once my paint is dry, I'm going to be using the JRV Green Sack Stripe stencil. I'm taping it down in place with some masking tape, and then I'm going to be using my JRV stencil brush with Dixie Belle's Vintage Duck Egg Chalk Mineral Paint. Now, I have the best success with these if I just press my brush down and gently run it along the stencil as opposed to dabbing or swirling. I find that this gives me the cleanest line. Next, I'm using IOD's Farm Animals stamp. I'm specifically using the lovely hen that comes in the pack with IOD's permanent black ink. I've taken it off the backing, and now I am carefully pressing my ink pad down, and I'm just tidying up any areas where I got a bit of ink with a wet wipe. I'm then going to very carefully position the hen where I want it in the center and press down, and I've got one hand in place holding it while the other hand applies pressure. Always keep one hand on the stamp to avoid any smudging. Next, I'm using IOD's letterpress stamp. There's so many lovely fonts in this stamp, and I'm spelling out the word fresh, and underneath it we're going to have eggs. So I'm positioning the letters how I want them on the sign, and then once I'm happy with them, I'm going to use part of a clear mount plastic sheet to press down. My stamps have adhered. I'm flipping it over, and now I'm just making sure that the stamps are as straight as can be, and then once I'm happy with that, I'll use my IOD permanent black ink and I will carefully ink up the letters. Once I'm happy with my stamps, I'll carefully position them up the top and just making sure it's centered, and then I'll press down. Remember, always have one hand holding it in place, and I'm just very gently pressing down on the letters, and then when I think I've got a good impression, I will lift it up. I'm then going to clean off my stamps and remove any of the letters that I don't need, and we are going to position the letters E and G first. And once I have those down, I just need to work out the spacing, because obviously I need 2 of the letter G, so I've just moved the G across where I think it should go. I've added the letter S, I'm inking up the stamps, and then I will carefully position them underneath our first word and then press down. And again, I'm not going to apply too much pressure. I don't want any smearing, and obviously I have left that gap for the other letter G. So all that's left for me to do now is to ink up the letter G again and then position it where I want it to go up on the sign, and then the lettering is done. So there was one more design element that I wanted to add. I love these laurels from the Queen Bee stamp, so I've positioned them on my sign where I want them to go. And once I'm happy with the position, I'm grabbing my clear mount, positioning it over the stamps, and then I'm pressing down so that the stamps will come away on my sheet once I've pulled it away. Then I'm inking up my stamps with my ink pad, and again being careful not to get ink where I shouldn't. And once I'm happy with that, I will very carefully turn over my clear mount, position it where I want the stamps to go, and then I will press down. Once my ink's dry, I'll seal it with a spray sealer and reattach the twine. And here's our finished egg sign. I love how this sign turned out, and I definitely think this could stay out all year round. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. I really hope that you enjoyed this video collection, and you can find the products used in this video on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share this out to a friend that you think might enjoy it.